Let's call, oops, I'm sorry, Jared. Thanks. It's 6:01. We'll call the meeting to order. First item on the agenda is roll call.
David Kennedy. Sorry, mic off. Todd McCulloch, David Kennedy, Tricia Brown,
Here.
Kristen Runge,
Here.
Al Dassow. Here. Jeff Tews.
Here.
And Abigail Zellner.
Here.
And just a note, Jeff Tews is participating via Zoom tonight. There he is.
Hi, Jeff. All right. Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes. Does anyone have any additions, corrections, or changes suggesting to the minutes? No, seeing none, do we have a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve.
All right, do we have a second?
I'll make the second.
All right.
Let Jeff do it since he was.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I'm going to recuse myself since I wasn't there.
All right. Motion carries. Next item up is public comment, and I will make a note that we do have a public hearing on TID 6 later, so please save comments on TID 6 for the public hearing. Do we have anybody that would like to comment on anything on the agenda other than the public hearing material today? All right, second call. Do we have anyone online that would?
I do see one online participant. I would just note that if any online participants who want to make a comment, click the raise hand button and we'll bring them in. And at this time, we're taking comments for items, any item except for the public hearing regarding TID 6.
Seeing no public comments, we'll close the public comment. Thank you very much. Public comment item, and then move on to presentations. And we have a presentation on Project Home from Adam Weber or Weiss today. And is Adam, hi Adam, thank you for coming today. Yeah. I will have you up at the podium if you don't mind and press the mic to green. And sorry, I didn't see you come in. But we're happy to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you for having us today. I just wanted to stop out and let everyone know that, we'd started this discussion late last year before, I believe it was Todd before he retired. And now Kylie kind of picked that up and we are discussing this again. So they were looking for ways to utilize some of Project Home services in conjunction with the Waunakee Housing Betterment Fund, which is available to residents of Waunakee for making needed home improvements. There was a portion of that that requires homeowners to also chip in 50% in additional work with whatever that they're getting done to their home. So Project Home is an independent nonprofit out of Madison, and we administer for the County of Dane the minor home repair program and also the major home rehab program that would serve the village of Waunakee. So with that, the minor home repair program takes care of needed carpentry, electrical, plumbing work, exterior improvements up to about $5,000. So that could be matched well with residents who are going through that program. There are some assessed value limits on the home. There's household income level limits. All of that's found on our website, which I can get the village information about that. The major rehab program, that can go up to about $25,000 worth of work. And that's usually for bigger ticket items like siding, roofing, windows, doors, things like that. So if somebody's under orders from the village that they have to do some exterior improvements, we do have some programs available. That program is not a grant program. That's run as a second mortgage on the home. It's 0 interest rate, no monthly payments, but it sits in the background as a second mortgage until the home is no longer their primary residence, and then they owe the money back to the program. So there are a couple of options out there that Project Home already administers in the village of Waunakee. So if some residents are interested in going through the Housing Betterment Fund, we may have some programs available that they could couple with that to use as funding in kind. So I'm here if anybody has any questions. I do have some additional information I can get for the village and the CDA as well. So
That's great information. So a question, then the second mortgage on the home, do they pay on that or does that just sit inert until? they sell the home?
correct. It sits inert. It's a deferred payment loan. It's a 0 interest loan. They do not make monthly payments. It just sits in the background. And would, obviously any title search would see that on there as well. So if they're going to get additional loans and things that, we would take a junior position to that. But that would sit in the background until that's no longer their primary residence. Yes,
And how do you know it's no longer their primary residence? And what happens if the house is underwater?
that would come from a title search when they're going to be selling the house or once it goes into probate, if they pass away. We would be notified, or the county, in fact, would be notified because we do file that note mortgage with the county. So they would be notified that that money is due. Because they do take a junior position, yes, there is a chance that that money does not get paid back if they're that much underwater. But that's pretty rare.
Let me refine my first. Yeah, I'm sorry. This color thing. Let me refine my first question, and that is, I have a number of clients who have declared residency in other states. So their Wisconsin home no longer is their primary residence.
Yeah.
How do you know when someone, that is no longer their principal residence, in that situation?
Sure, we do not track that. So that's once the note's filed with the county kind of tracks all that information. So unless that resident came forward and said, this is no longer my residence, we probably wouldn't know about it. I think that situation's fairly rare from my understanding. Generally speaking, they sell the home, or if, it's somebody who passes away, they do have the option, if they do pass away and whoever the house goes to, if they're income eligible, they can then assume the loan on that property as well. So that could get carried with the property for as long as somebody living there is income eligible.
Other questions?
Just one. Is it pretty common to have your program coupled with another, I guess, a support system like the Wanakee Housing Fund?
Yes, so we also administer something called the weatherization program in Wisconsin. And we are the provider, Project Home is the provider for Dane County and Greene County. So we do energy efficiency improvements, heating system upgrades. We also administer the emergency heating system and emergency water heating program for Dane County and Greene County. So when people are going through those programs, we're always looking to see if they may be eligible or have other household repair needs that could get served through one of these other programs that we administer. So it's common to have multiple programs running on any given property.
And I also see on your website that you offer classes.
We do.
Yeah.
Yes. So we offer classes through our housing center. Typically, we administer classes throughout Dane and Greene County at public libraries, about one a month. We have a class tonight going on down in Stoughton on drywall repairs. It's a lot of basic home repair information. I think we have a class at the Wanakee Library next month on tips on hiring a general contractor, things to look out for, what to look for in a contract, things like that. So we do partner with MG&E. They fund our housing center classes, and we have staff members that present on topics, a wide range of things, basic plumbing repairs, like I said, drywall repairs, things to plan for remodeling a bathroom, stuff like that.
Excellent. And they're free?
They are free.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Other questions? Yeah, sounds like you're doing great work, and really glad to know that you're a resource, and hoping that we can couple some of our Wanakee Housing Betterment Award winners or recipients with some of the work that you do. That's really great.
Thank you. Yes, we'll get some more information to Kylie.
Great. Thank you much. Yeah, and thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you.
All right. Next item on the agenda is a presentation and public hearing regarding the proposed amendment of boundaries and project plan of tax incremental district number 6. And we will start that out by Lauren. Would you mind introducing the topic? Or Lauren or Todd?
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me get this shared. And we were able to get public hearing comment cards. So if you filled one out, feel free to pass them down and I will collect those.
Does anyone need one? Anyone need a comment card?
And the way we'll structure it tonight, we'll have our staff introduce it, then we'll have Todd Taves from Ehlers make a presentation. We'll invite a couple of comments from our school board representative who's here tonight, and then the developer will speak, and then we'll open up the public hearing. So we get kind of all of the information first before we make public comment.
So we will go ahead and start talking. So I obviously, for those who don't know me, I'm Lauren. I'm the Community Development Director. I started early January. After this presentation, I'll hand it over to Todd Taves, who is our Municipal Finance Advisor with Ehlers. So obviously tonight we're talking about the TID 6 amendment, proposed amendment. A little bit of history behind it. TID 6 originally, as it exists now, this yellow boundary, is Kilkenny Farms. It was created July 20th, 2015, has a 20-year lifetime ending in 2035, which is the statutory 20-year lifetime, but it's expected to recover its costs and close by 2028. It's approximately 82 acres, 80% commercial, 20% or commercial mixed use, 20% residential, and it's actually mostly built out already. So it's been incredibly successful and is so far by January 1st, 2023 has generated over $80 million in new incremental value, which is superb. It is also lent over $6.2 million in street and utility improvements to Century Avenue and County Highway 8 or County Highway Q from 2nd Street to the South Village border, which included improvements for traffic flow, safety, lighting, and stormwater. So it was done in separate phases, but you can see it's quite a large stretch there that that improvements were done on. The proposed amendments is Kilkenny Farms West. So if you look, it's kind of hard to see on the screen, but on the bottom right-hand side where that map is, you see the original Kilkenny Farms TID in blue, and then the proposed area in orange, kind of to the north and west of that. It's approximately 28 acres mixed use. The final plat was approved in August 2023. The 20-year lifetime for this amended TID would be the same as the original one, 2035, with a projected closure by 2031. So it would only extend the life of the TID by about 3 to 4 years. The developer is putting in over $5.8 million in public infrastructure costs within this new TID area. Their request of $2.8 million reimbursement is about 48% of what they're putting in. So a total of $4.06 million in project costs, the $2.8 million requested in reimbursement from the developer, and then another $1.26 million in TIF funded village projects. Just a quick look at the master plan. You see a lot of yellow on there. That's residential. That's not included in the TID area. What we're talking about to include in the TID is on the right-hand side, that red and orange mixed use area at the top corner. And then just below that, those 2 orange parcels. This is consistent with the future land use map and the joint comprehensive plan. So again, because there are so many colors on this map, it's hard to find one that sticks out, but there's a blue circle kind of towards the center left of this picture, which shows both purple and red in there, which is both commercial and mixed use. The way the boundary is drawn indicates that there's no set boundary of what should be commercial or mixed use. Both would be a fitting product within this area, or fitting land use within this area. And the proposed village projects, the main ones are street and utility improvements. Woodland Drive would have quite a bit done to it, from the western border where the middle school and Newell Elementary are to the western edge of the amended TID district, which would be adding curb and gutter, widening the road, adding a 10-foot shared use path along the south side of Woodland Drive. So we're not just talking about vehicle traffic flow, but also foot traffic flow for those younger kids in those schools that can't drive. Adding a segment of water main intersection improvements at Eldora and Woodland, adding some storm sewer, and also repaving the surface with asphalt to just improve the driving surface. Utility improvements, these were already planned and kind of coincided with the proposed amendment of this TID, which are capacity improvements to the Ashlon lift station, as well as well water storage and booster stations. So this would provide money, this kind of serendipitous, it would provide a little bit of money that utilities wouldn't have to charge customers for, or that the village wouldn't have to tax or bond for. So that's what we have from the staff side. Todd, did you want to add anything else? Either Todd?
Did you want me to walk through the, and as Todd brings that up, I'll just mention much of what is in my slide deck is redundant with what Lauren just presented. So I'm going to just focus on what is either additive and also to hit on a few points of emphasis. So Lauren talked about the existing district. The one thing that I would add is that this district has been quite successful over time. And at the end of 2023, the unaudited cash balance is roughly 2.33 million. So in other words, this district is in a very good position to undertake additional projects without a need for any significant additional financing on the village side. Lauren detailed the project cost, but just as a recap, the purpose of the amendment is twofold. First, it would provide for $2.8 million in development incentives to reimburse the developer strictly for public infrastructure costs that they would fund upfront, which also represents just a portion of the total public improvements that are required for the larger area. And the other component would be 1.26 million. And these would be, again, the village projects, the TID share of those that were just detailed on the previous slide. So adding the costs as well as the 28 acres of additional territory to the district. That is the statutory purpose of the amendment. We've looked at the map already. Again, the area in the orange, the 28 acres is what we would be adding. The blue line represents the original 82 acre district. Slightly more detailed view reflecting the plat. And again, I would just, as a point of emphasis, note that the amended area would only include the commercial / mixed use lots. It would not include any of the low density residential development that would be to the west. Land use map, which Lauren showed, again, mixed use and commercial within the area. The various village projects, some occur within the proposed district boundary or the amended district boundary. Others lie within a 1/2 mile radius. Under the statute, you can pay for costs related to the district, not only within its boundaries, but within an area that is within 1/2 mile. So this map identifies both those projects with the color coding, and then in the blue shading shows the 1/2 mile area. You will note that there is a orangish red box to the far right, pumping station improvements that lies just out that. That is okay. There is a provision in the statute that allows you to spend a pro rata share to the extent it benefits the TID area for any type of a water system improvement, sanitary sewer improvement, or stormwater management conveyance. So that is not limited to that 1/2 mile area. This is an excerpt from the project plan, just showing the detail and a projected year by year outlay. To date, the district, and to date, I mean through the end of last year, has spent roughly $12.4 million. The very top part of this exhibit shows the projected outlay associated with commitments that the village has already made within the existing district. That's roughly about 2 million more in debt service, as well as development incentives and some administrative costs. What you see in the center portion then would be what we would be adding to the project plan. Again, this is that roughly $4 million figure, which would be 1.2 million in the TIF district share of various village capital improvement projects and 2.8 million in developer reimbursement for their upfront costs to fund public infrastructure. We also list what's referred to as non-project costs, which is a required element of a project plan. This is simply costs that will be made by the village, but paid for from other sources. In other words, these components are not paid for by the TIF. Notably, in addition to the amounts that would be reimbursed to the developer, there is an additional 3 million that they would expend that they would not receive any TIF assistance for. As I mentioned earlier, the district is expected to be able to fund all costs either with cash that is presently on hand or cash that will be collected on an annual basis. The district brings in a fairly significant amount of cash each year. There was some discussion at the Joint Review Board meeting that preceded this meeting about the potential to advance some of the village projects. That's certainly a possibility. And if the village wished to do that, there's no reason they couldn't borrow if they so chose. And if that was the strategy, the way to do that would be simply to borrow over a shorter period of time, 3 years, 5 years, whatever would be required based on the cash flow projection, which would minimize the associated interest expense if something was deemed a high priority and there was a desire to accelerate that faster than what we show in the plan. Within that amended area, we are projecting that we could realize approximately $20 million in additional incremental value. That would be on top of the 80 million that is already on the ground as of 1/1/23 within the existing district for a projected total full development scenario of over $100 million by TID termination. This exhibit projects the actual tax increment collection. I'm looking at the row that starts with construction year 2022, which reflects the increment that's actually collected for the current budget year. So the district is receiving 1.37 million in incremental value. As I mentioned, the district does collect a substantial amount each year that can pay for not only existing liabilities, but can cash fund other costs. When we layer on that additional projected development in the years 25 through 2030, we see that that eventually ramps up the projected increment collection to roughly 1.7 million on an annual basis. This is the cash flow that accounts for both, again, existing liabilities as well as the additional costs that are proposed through this amendment. This is not only forward-looking, but provides an accounting of all actual costs that have been incurred since the district's inception. The orange bar indicates the point in time where we anticipate that cumulative revenues generated over the life of the district exceed the liabilities. So this indicates that we could close the district as soon as the year 2031, which would still be 6 years prior to its maximum statutory life. As Lauren had mentioned, based on the status quo scenario with no amendment, this would reflect roughly a 3 or 4 year delay in closure in order to pay for these additional costs. Just a quick note as to process, I mentioned we held the Organizational Joint Review Board meeting earlier this evening. If the Community Development Authority elects to act on this this evening, it would advance to the Village Board for consideration at next Monday's regular meeting and would then need to come back to the Joint Review Board for final consideration. And we did tentatively schedule that meeting for April 25th. 5:30 p.m.
All right, thank you very much, Todd. Next, I'd like to invite, if he is interested, Jack Heineman, a school board representative here today to make any comments that you might want to share. Yep, if you don't mind, yeah. And the mic should be on, press it so it's on green. So you're welcome. And thanks for being here, Jack.
I'm Jack Heineman, Board Treasurer, Waunakee Community School Board Treasurer. And what we want to talk about is we're excited about the TID district. And the reason we're excited is because when we sit around our board table, we're always looking at, our kids and safety. We want to have a safe environment for our kids. And that includes getting to school. And what we like about this is when you look at the project plan, they're putting in a bike trail on the south side of Waunakee or on Woodland. And they're also improving the roads. As we put the next school into operation, there's probably going to be a lot more traffic, with elementary going in there. Parents are dropping off kids and bus traffic and things like that. So I think doing a comprehensive plan the way they've set it out here, I think is very appropriate. And we just did a study on our school safety from the standpoint of walking to school. And we looked at each one of the buildings for that study. So I think we're excited because one of the things, if we've got the TID, we can accelerate those projects, and we could potentially have those started in 25. And we're opening up our school in this fall 2024. So that's why we're supportive of it. The other thing is development that brings in housing and so forth is very important to us as well, because we've just gone through a comprehensive plan, with one of our planners, and yes, we're putting up a lot of apartment buildings and so forth, but that doesn't bring kids. Generally, what we're finding is those buildings have about 10% kids coming there. What we need is housing. And if we have housing, families move in and we have kids. And, if you look at our enrollment, they're relatively flat. So, what we want to do is encourage, anything that, helps support bringing in housing is great. And if you look at the map, again, just from a safety standpoint, without the TID, you've got one entrance in and out of that subdivision. And, the challenge is if you've got an emergency there and that one road is blocked, how are you going to get, your emergency vehicles and so forth in there? But just wanted to extend our support on TID 6 because, we think it's a good opportunity, for not only the village, but the school system as well. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Jack. Yeah. And next up, I'd like to invite Don Tierney or his representative to take the floor and talk about the project.
There we go. Can you hear me now? Okay, good. It's interesting. A lot of people don't know this, but a large developer owned Kilkenny Farms. It was actually tied up from 2002 to 2016. And one day I got a call from a bank and they said, Mr. Tierney, there's no write downs. You're going to write the check. You're going to pay the freight. We want you to take over this project. So we started working with this. We worked with Verbiker. Matt and Joe are here tonight. They've done an excellent job. We spent hundreds of hours working with the requests of the school. There's a backbone going down the center. It's a beautiful plant. There's basically a trail system. So if you know what the Monadon, when that was designed, you go through that center spine, and then you go through the park, and then you go through the school. It's almost a carbon copy of it. It's beautiful. So this all started, I did Westbridge, no TIF money. If I never seen TIF money, I'd be better off. But here's what happened. John Loudmeyer called me one day and he said, Tierney, there was a study done and about 80 cents of every dollar is going to Sun Prairie restaurants, Madison restaurants, Middleton. We've got some great older restaurants, but we got to up our game and you're going to help us. So that was a huge, huge, huge job. When I got the plat that was done by this large company that had this tied up from 2002, this was about, Jerry, what year was that when we took over? About 20? Yeah, it was about 2000. Yeah. So we started planning, and what it was, you ever drive in Old Cottage Grove where it was lined with duplexes? When you come down the main street coming north to south, that's what the plan was. There was duplexes backed up to Q, no commercial property. So we went to work and we bit the bullet. In other words, we put in a 15-inch sewer We put this thing in, so when people come in to Wanakee, and then the village planners of Wanakee ask us, they said, Tierney, we want this to be the signature area. That means buildings got 4 sides, Buck and Honey's, Quick Trip, the bank. You can't just plaster it on one end and have a facade on the other. This is what we want. And it's not an easy job to do. If you own commercial property, sometimes they're empty, sometimes they're full, but you gotta hang in there. So we worked hard and we turned this into, I think, a nice product. When I was talking to Quick Trip, I gotta tell you this, it's kind of a plus for Wanakee. The people from Middleton go to school in Wanakee. They drive their children by that every day. And that's why Quick Trip wanted to be here, because them folks are coming to visit us. So I'm really happy with the way it turned out. I don't think a lot of people, there's people here that in this room that don't like me. And a lot of times I'm addressing the people sitting here that don't like me. I grew up on a rough farm. We had very little. And if you notice in a little town, they don't care if the suit and ties come out of Chicago, the old families, but you better not have one of those that poor Irish farmer that didn't have nothing. Man, if he tries to do something, they don't like it. And I can't help that. So those people that don't like me, I'm okay with it. I'm going to keep trying. And when you look at this Woodland Drive and the beautiful school they're building, and the fact that I went in and put a huge amount of money in the planning with the people that did a great job, there's a tweener lane. You go to Sauk City, when you get over the bridge, there's that tweener lane. They said, we want that. We want safety turns. We want it done right. The funny part of it is we're only asking for 2.8. If we walk away from this, somebody else comes in here, they're not going to touch this thing for 2.8. I want to do this. It's a great community and I need your help. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. Thanks, Don. All right, with that, I think we're ready to open up the public hearing. Let's open the public hearing at 6:33. Comments are limited to 3 minutes. And if you don't mind, when you go to the podium, please make sure the mic is on green. State your name, state your address, and Lauren.
And one other note for those attending online, if you do care to speak during the hearing, please click the raise hand button and we'll bring you in.
So first up, we have Mary Heimbecker, 306 West 3rd Street, Wanakee.
I'd just like to say I'm opposed to amending TID 6 to include the west side of Highway Q. We have 2 developments that are moving along nicely with no TID money. This development will have housing that will bring more children into our school, although it's not in the TID. It will affect the school, and our school system now is sending out a notice saying that they want more money, that they don't have enough money coming in and they want a referendum to allow more tax money to them. I'd also like to say that if the road needs to be improved by those schools, why are we waiting until 2025? The new Heritage Elementary School is opening this fall. If it's such a concern for safety of the children, that road should be taken care of now, not in 2025 after it's open for a whole year. Are you waiting for children to be hurt? I already hear of what chaos it is at the intermediate school to drop off. What's it going to be like up there when the elementary school does open up? Take care of that road now. Use public money from our village, not TIF money, to get it done so that our children are safe. And that's why I'd like to encourage the body to look for other ways to do this funding. Why can't we just borrow the money for the roads and handle it that way instead of giving TIF money if it's roads that need to be done? I have no problem with that whatsoever. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Next up, we have Linda Ashmore, 114 South Street in Wanakee.
Thanks for the presentation. I always speak against TIFs. It's nothing personal against Don. I mean, you build a bunch of stuff. And the reason I speak against TIFs is because it takes money away from schools, Dane County, Madison College, and the village. And I understand Steve Summers did a nice presentation at a village board meeting sometime on the last 6 months or so. And state aid makes up that money that doesn't go into here. There's nothing that makes up the village, county, or or school, or county school and village though. So I see this area as being extremely desirable. We've got a brand new school going in here. And so I think it could be developed without using the TIF money. It's for Don, it's a smart move for any business person to come in and say, hey, give me money. It will make it much easier for me to get this done. And so what I'd like to see anytime a TIF comes before you is a comparison of what it would cost if you just did, okay, I'm going to do the infrastructure cost, and what would it cost to the taxpayer? And then you have something to compare it to. That, you know, if you're, how much is this per household? And honestly, I think if you did that, it would go nowhere because people don't want to pay for brand new developments that are out of their price ranges for a lot of us. So one of the things too with the funding for this, the school aid can change over time, but we've seen how it's calculated change over the years. And so when you do a TIF, you make a 20-year commitment to say the developer, it's a contract, you know, the developer is going to get this money. And when that changes, if it changes, then the school district can be kind of out. So development of commercial there, the pandemic changed a lot of commercial, how commercial works. Amazon took the place of a lot of stores. So as we develop commercial, I don't know if that's really the best. I understand that the comp plan has it there, but maybe it's time to look at the comp plan again. So anyways, I'm opposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
Next up, we have, looks like Dennis Helt, 214K.
First of all, I'd like to tell Don, I'm not one of the ones who hate you. I just disagree. And because you're gonna make a lot of money off of this land. This is the prime area of the town. When do you say no? When do you say no to a TIF? Do you ever say no? Let him build the road structure, the infrastructure that has to be done. We don't need to, it's gonna be built anyway. The but-for test is but for it won't happen. Well, it will happen. I don't care if you fund it or not, it's gonna happen. And as far as I have a question of zoning, can't you make it, zone it the way you want it, whether there's a TIF or not? So I'm asking, so maybe a response would be nice when you come to that. And this other thing, this school thing where the school will get money if they make a TID. Yes, that helps Wanakee, but I think that's a bad policy for the state because other schools are not going to get that money, even though we have a prime development going up there and we're all rich and having a good time with it. We still get TID, we still get state compensation as a TID district because it doesn't count on our tax roll. Well, I don't like that either, so I'm against.
All right, thank you, Dennis.
Next up is Mike Nelson, 1412 Palmgrass Pass. Up in Wanakee.
Yes. Okay, I'm actually for TIF and I have spoken at meetings before, and the reason why I'm for a TIF is that just look at the numbers. Right now, I've heard the numbers that about our total tax bill every year is about 10% commercial and about 90% residential. I have seen, in my mind, if we can increase the amount of commercial property we have in town, we can lower that ratio to maybe 15% commercial and 85% residential.
as a result, I can tell that my tax bill will my portion of the total tax bill will go down, which I would really welcome. The other thing, I have a couple other comments, is that we've heard, I was here at a meeting in, I think it was November, late November, December, and a financial person from the school district gave quite a speech. And what I got out of that speech was the fact that these TIFs do not really hurt the financial situation of the schools. And I'm glad to hear that. I think that's a point we need to make. The other thing I want to make comment about is that I've spent 30 years of my life appraising both commercial and residential real estate. And I know that I have also, for banks in the future or past, I have done a number of subdivisions around the county. And I want to say that the infrastructure that goes into these is horrendous. First of all, the amount of money that has to be paid lots of times for the vacant land that these developers have to pay, it just keeps getting higher and higher. Sometimes I wonder how they make it go. But the infrastructure with all the piping that goes in, the water and the sewer, and all the other things that have to, roads, and I believe that this TIF includes a lot of extras, like the common areas where the kids can gather and where they can go to school. I think that's another plus for this TIF. I guess that's about all I got. I just want to know, I want you all to know that I'm not even positive that this subdivision would go if this TIF was not approved. As comment was made that it would go anyway, and I'm not really positive that's the case. What might happen if this doesn't get approved is that area would not be commercial anymore, be residential. And now we're looking at duplexes backing up to Highway Q, and I wouldn't want to see that either. So, okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Next up is Pat Benish, 1255 Dartmouth Drive, Wanakee.
Hi, I've grown up in Wanakee. I continue to live in Wanakee, and I'm in full support of expanding the TID district. I think it's wonderful to drive into Wanakee and have restaurant options, have fuel, have the necessities that I think a resident requires and I think we demand, right? So we'd like to move forward with this and not delay, right? I think any delaying would obviously, I think $2.8 million, right? I don't know when this started, but inflation's been a real thing. So if these numbers, I think, are probably a little pre-inflation, right? If you're in the construction field and you turn on the news, you definitely see what costs are today. So let's not delay. Let's approve and move this to the next stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Pat.
Next, we have Brian Wallace, 1232 Hanover Trail in Wanakee.
I guess first of all, I'll just voice my support for the TID. The numbers speak for themselves. Even if you just look at the potential increment of $20 million on an expenditure of, or a tax gain of approximately, and I'm not taking into fees or other things that come out of there, $400,000, you're talking about 7 years to pay it back. That's pretty successful. And you compare that, you've already got an evidence here of how successful it can be. The other thing that gets lost, I think, is just from the developments that have happened over the last 20 years, 25 years, and what that has brought to the community as far as just general tax base. When I sat on Public Works 14 years ago, probably I started, the budget there was $300,000. And you heard Bill earlier talk about it being $2 million now. That just doesn't grow on its own, right? It grew because of the tax base that's been generated from these developments. So I'm in full support of this TID.
Thank you, Brian.
Next is Todd Scheffler, 1108 Parkview Circle, Wanakee.
So I'm a resident of Wanakee, have been for 22 years. I'm in support of it. And I just want to share a story. My wife and I were very involved in the building of the ice arena. We were also very involved in the capital campaign for the turf. And so the ice arena, for those of you who want a little history, Don had to do a land swap in order for that to happen. And without his support, it wouldn't be here. And it has, the village has very little invested in that. It's still run by the same or same board. It's a nonprofit. There were some funds, or there were some funds that the city helped with, or the village did. And it was like $500,000, and then there's a loan that goes with it. We're paying the loan back. There's no other cost to the village, right? And that's a huge asset. And it wouldn't have happened without Don's involvement. So that's another asset to the community. And that's why, you know, some families actually move here for that. So I'm in support of the TID.
Thank you very much, Todd. Next up.
Next is Dave Betcher, 916 Lexington Way in Wanakee.
As some of you know, I was on the school board for 9 years, and I got very deeply involved in how TIDs are financed and how the funding happens and what the but-for test is. I'm also in construction. I make my living off the fact that projects happen. If they don't happen, I and all my fellow union members are out of work and we have nothing to do, and we take that hit. So I do support some TIDs. I don't support them all. Why? Because I think in the long run, TIDs that don't meet the but-for test hurt their local economy and hurt construction overall by taking money from what could be used on other projects and putting them to projects that didn't need it. Whether it's about pushing the profit margin, whether it's just about who pays for the road that had to go into that project, that's a different question. As you hear some of the comments around this, notice it wasn't about the TID district. It was about the school. It was about a road that had not in the school district. It's about, well, residential property, whether it grows or not. That's not in the TID district. The true question here should be only about those commercial properties and whether they meet that but-for test or not. The problem is you don't have a single project here to even talk about. There's not one business named. There's not one job tied to it. There's not one company considering or not considering buying into this project. And yet we're somehow determining they're not going to do it. And we don't even know who we're talking about. I think the classic example is when we go back to the original TID 6, there was talk about Hy-Vee and another grocery store that was going to locate right where you're talking about putting this TID. They're not here. They decided not to do it. But remember, when they made their offer, what were they saying? How much TID money did they need to sit on that corner of Q and Woodland? Zero. So why are we now talking about putting almost $4 million into a piece of land that someone was willing to bid and put a project on with literally zero TID money? Yet now we're going to take $4 million. We sit there and say that the school district won't be harmed by this money. In a way, yes, and in a way, no. You have to understand school finance. The problem with school finance is it's based on shared revenue. It's based on how it comes from the state. There's a lovely calculator on the Department of Public Education that sits there and tells you, if you calculate through all this, it comes up to zero. Why? Because it makes one huge assumption. No one else in the state of Wisconsin will do a TID district that year. Then you get your money back. The problem is there is a fixed cap of money in that pool that year. So the minute everybody puts a TID in, once you see them all, it's over. So there is an effect.
Thank you, Dave. Next up.
Next is Robert McPherson, 1703 Alexandria Court in Wanakee.
Good evening, CDA. I'm speaking as I'm not allowed to speak in favor or in opposition of this particular project. I'm speaking in general to TIDs and in general to the existing TID that already has been voted on and is in place within the district so that our attorney isn't yelling at me after this meeting. My concern is that the existing TID that was already in place did promise certain improvements that the village has not yet seen benefit from and probably will not see benefit from, namely a grocery store. I do know that at the corner of Kew and Woodland, there was discussion in the not too distant past for Festival Foods to take that property and to develop it. And then through a series of exchanges that were made in the public, it was just discovered that there was no will to move forward between the developer and Festival Foods to get a grocery store in that corner. We were also told at the time, very famously, as far as an exciting plan commission meeting can get, that Hy-Vee was going, and Forward Development were going to drop their request for a TID across the street as well, because Don Tierney didn't need to have TID to develop Kilkenny West. Unfortunately, what we're now seeing about 5 years later is that that was not true. Now they are requesting TID. These are improvements that are being asked for within the village that we were already planning to finance through normal budgeting process. And now we're looking for a way to just divert some of those costs for 7 years, which is plainly unacceptable. We can find the money. And there is a way that, you can look at this and say this benefits schools, but I would remember that the school district benefits when we remove things from taxing districts because they get more money from the state because of that, because of their tertiary number, which I'm not going to get into. I only have 3 minutes. The point I'm trying to make for all this is that we do need more housing, and housing is going to occur in that area regardless. Demand in this village is incredibly high for housing. Our housing prices reflect that. So if we're looking to make this decision off of houses that may or may not be built, please remember that is not what this is going to accomplish. That's going to occur either way. And if you're worried about making improvements for the road for kids coming into the school over there, I think you're going to be hard pressed to find parents that are enthusiastic about elementary age school children crossing Highway Q, which has at that point, I believe 5 or 6 lanes that they would need to get across. So unless we're going to lower Q down to 25 all the way down at Quick Trip, I really don't think you're going to have a lot of parents enthusiastic about children crossing where people are going about 45 to 50 miles an hour as they're coming into the village. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Next up.
Brian Meister W8951 Morse Road in Poinet.
Hello, I'm Brian Meister with LMS Construction. I'm here on the behalf of the TIF. Just previously, we've worked with Don Tierney for the past 30 years, worked with Don and Jerry and his family. I've seen a lot of change in this town in 30 years. Been tremendous. Schools, people. He's brought the parade of homes to town. How many years now in a row? Yeah, it's been a long time. He's put a lot of work into what he's done. Jerry has also, his family, lots of hours. I don't think they just sit back and get the benefits of what you think is given to them. That ain't the way it works, I don't believe. I'd like to see it happen for you guys. And I'm an outsider looking in. This is a great town. In every community we work in all kinds of communities. I think anybody would be privileged to have somebody like Don Tierney in their town developing. That's just me from looking from the outside in, but I've spent my last 30 years here. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Next up.
Dennis Kelly 7662 Highway I in Vienna.
Yeah, I'm like Brian here. I'm an outsider looking in. You drive to Wanakee and you see all the good things, and or any town. And Don and Jerry Tierney are, the ones that started it. And you got to be thankful that you got a nice group like that to work with. And I'm in support of it. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Dennis. Next up.
Brandon Cook 465 North Baldwin Street in Madison.
I remember Wanakee before Don, or not necessarily before Don, but 40 years ago, and it's gone through a ton of changes. I am fortunate enough to build houses in Wanakee, exclusively in Wanakee, and the reason for that is Don. He's given me a tremendous opportunity, and I think when Don's successful, the whole community is successful. He keeps going, he keeps doing more projects, and I think that's a good thing. I think the TIF will help this project move forward. it will bring more housing. And then hopefully Don decides to do another project because the other developer in town isn't interested in helping people like me build houses. And, you know, I can't speak enough about Don and how much he's helped me. I wouldn't be in the house building business without Don. So if this helps Don and it helps this project move forward, I fully support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brandon. Next up.
We have Matt Schreiner, who wanted to register support. Would you like to speak? Okay, and we will need your street address and municipality for this sheet. So he wanted to register support, but does not wish to speak.
Right, do we have anyone online?
Again, a reminder to click the raise hand button and we can bring you in to speak. At the moment, no hands are raised.
All right, and one last call for members of the audience to speak. All right, seeing none, thank you all very much for registering your comment. Oh, Jerry?
Sorry, Jerry, do you want to go? Okay, go ahead.
Please, yeah.
So we have Jerry Tierney, 6789 Waders Vineyard Trail, Sun Prairie.
Hello, hello. I I don't reside here, but spent a good part of my life here and continue to. And you know, I kind of, I spent a lot of time here and growing up, so I kind of say I'm from here, but from DeForest. So we, you know, I don't know. I'm gonna let Dad handle this one. It looks like somebody's waiting for the, you know, the double dog dare. And I'm gonna leave that up to my dad to handle that. But when it comes to the but-for test, but I'll tell you how I feel about it is, you know, developing in towns is kind of like when I got a 3-year-old girl and, you know, sometimes they get owly at daycare and this and that. You know, and sometimes they'll be playing in a sandbox. And one of them, a lot of times, most of the time it is probably my kid, but you know, one of them will get a little bully or whatever, and then the other kids just, they kind of take their toys and they go to a different sandbox for a while. And, you know, it's just the way it works, you know, and that's the way it works in the developing world. And we never knew that. And we were kind of blinded by, I guess, you know, Dad's from here, it's a hometown, you know, we're pretty committed to just kind of stick here with no matter what, right? So we've done a lot of great things with the help of a lot of great people from a lot of great places, and a lot of things have happened, you know, over the last 30 years. It's been quite a thing. And, you know, part of that, you know, and I don't think he sure doesn't want to take any blame for this because he would never change the way he is no matter what, but he did give a good part of his fatherhood up to do what he's done. And, you know, but I wouldn't change anything either. I wouldn't change one thing about how Don Tierney raised 4 kids. You know, if anybody ever threatened one of us, you know, they wouldn't do it twice. And everybody that's worked with us knows that. And anybody that is important to him or helped him out, I could tell everybody, we could tell stories for hours. We don't have time for that. Everybody knows that. You know, I was gonna speak a little bit about numbers and tips and stuff and people, supposed experts on school financing and stuff, but the bottom line is it doesn't pay, because if you truly don't understand it by now, because every time somebody's gonna do something, you just oppose it and you don't understand it, but you think you do, that's fine, that's up to you. But I'm not gonna waste my time. There's experts here that if things were spoken that were wrong, I hope they correct them. That's not my job anymore. I'm out of gas as far as giving my life. I've given a lot of my body to this town, laying bricks when I was 10 years old, and just a lot of stuff. So I, you know, I'll say is, you know, for example, somebody says 4 million, no, it's 2.8. The other 1.2 is for the village to spend on whatever they want outside of the TIF district. And if you're that much of an expert, you know that, you know, don't pretend to be an expert if you're not. I'm not pretending to be. They're up there. Ask them. If you don't know what you're talking about, well, don't talk. All I'm gonna talk about is what I know is we got a pretty good team. We got a good team lined up. I don't know their exact position, but we got a team here that we've never signed a contract with in 30 years. And when they're done with the job, send whoever they want to our doorstep and they get a check.
Jerry, real quick thing.
How many
So,
minutes?
Yeah, you surpassed your 3, although
Done.
I would assume that you could have spoken as a component of the
Well, that's it.
developer presentation, but we're still within the public hearing. So we have to stick to the
I'm-
3
I'm-
being in the public hearing. So
That's about all I got to say, but at some point, whoever wants to dare them, go ahead. But if they think this is gonna happen, and as far as festival, can I keep going on account of is the opposition or not?
I would,
I think we have to stop now, but we can
Thank you.
bring
But-
you in for some.
but Jerry,
Some
yeah,
point,
Later.
I
at the
want to talk
discretion
about
of
that.
Yeah.
Very
the
important.
CDA review.
Yeah, and I will have some questions that we'll direct to you guys in just a few seconds, if that's all right. All right, thank you very much though for speaking. Any other comments? All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing at 7:02. All right, I'm sure we've got a lot of questions after that. The first person I would like to ask a question of, Steve, could I call on you to speak about the impact on the school district? Would you be comfortable answering some questions or addressing those concerns? Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. So as far as the school district impact is concerned, how would this TID and TIDs in general impact the school district? And you heard some of the concerns out there that the pot of funding is limited, that we might not get reimbursed for the amount of money that we spend. Could you maybe talk us through that a little bit? And I'll also note, if you're interested in kind of the details of that, Steve was present at the CDA in February to give a really thorough presentation about it. And I forget if it was December or November that you came, perhaps it was January, to address the Board of Trustees as well. Both of those presentations are online and the slides are available as well if you're really interested in that. But would you mind summarizing?
Sure, thank you. And Monday night, the school board on the agenda had asked for the same presentation. So I did have the opportunity to share the presentation that I shared down here a couple of times with the school board. To really sum it up, a couple of things that I would just share. For the school district's budget, the budget from the state of Wisconsin is set by a formula called the revenue limit. And property value inside or outside of a tax district does not affect the revenue limit formula. So we always talk about the revenue limit is really what drives the resources that a school district has available to spend on education. So for that component, a tax district doesn't have an impact. But the funding of schools, which comes from either state equalization aid or the property tax levy, is affected by property values. And what I have shared with both the school board and the village board and the CDA is information about the impact for this current school year. So important points to acknowledge. Yes, it is only for this school year. School finance does change over time. The best that I'm able to do is use the resources that the DPI provides and go onto the DPI's website and run various scenarios to show what the impact would be. So when you look at the school district information that's available publicly this year from the DPI, if you were to add commercial property to the school district's equalization aid formula, funds are removed from the state. So the state aid formula removes funds from the Waunakee School District, but then the property would become eligible to be taxed under the property tax levy. The net effect is basically neutral. You could call it a wash. I gave an example to the school board on Monday night. I also shared an example down here, but the net impact as of today for the 23-24 school year is really a neutral impact on school districts. On the budget impact, there's no impact. And then on the funding side from the state aid And from the property tax levy, it's best described as neutral. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have about that.
Do we have questions? Committee members about that? No, we had a pretty thorough presentation. Yeah. All right. Other questions about school districts? So it's neutral. So we are not taking dollars out of the school district's pocket by doing a TID. I'm asking, I know that I'm repeating, but just to confirm.
Yeah, for the current school finance system, that's correct. I mean, it is, I would acknowledge, as some of the comments have been made, that the funding formula for schools changes over time. And the best we can do is look at it today, but the information that's available today, yes, that's correct.
Okay. You had a comment, Al? Yeah.
Yeah, so if I gotta turn this. So if I understand it, it's neutral as to whether it's the real estate taxes or the state aid. One goes up, the other goes down, and it's neutral to you. But when it comes to the state aid, and that goes up because the real estate goes down, that means we're taxed from the state income tax to fund that state aid. So from a taxpayer standpoint, that's where we pay for it at that point in time.
Sure. So the state equalization aid formula is funded by the state of Wisconsin, funded from revenues from the state. Every 2 years in the state budget process, the legislature passes a state budget that is then approved by the governor, vetoed. That process takes place. Whatever that dollar amount is, as Dave had mentioned, Dave was on the school board for a long time. Whatever that dollar amount is, ultimately goes into that aid formula and then is distributed to public schools. And the best we can do, again, is look at that 2-year window with how much funding is going in there. But yes, all schools do draw from those funds across the entire state, and it's distributed according to that formula. So yes, those are taxpayer funds coming to the school district, either locally through the property tax levy or the state aid formula, which is on a statewide basis. But in the end, it is taxpayer funds.
All right. Other questions? Okay. So second thing, when you did the presentation to both the board and this committee earlier this year, we talked about property tax revenue as one source of income for the school district, and the other was enrollment. And I happened to watch the presentation on enrollment that your demographic consultant gave. And am I understanding correctly? And this is, we're not funding housing in this TIF or TID. None of the funding is going towards the development of the housing portion of this development, but it's the same overall plat in GDP and eventually SIP. When we're talking about the need to grow enrollment, am I correct in remembering that we needed the new housing because new housing equals new families, whereas we're not turning over our existing housing at the rate we need to sufficiently maintain our steady upward increase? Are we maintaining enrollment, or are we kind of flat right now?
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate the question.
questions in
So,
there, yeah.
thank you. So as far as the enrollment for the school district, as Jack mentioned, we're pretty stable. We haven't really been increasing in the recent past. There've been small changes. What we're seeing in the school district is large senior classes graduating. So example might be 325 students. And much smaller class sizes enrolling in the district. So we might have like 260, 280 kindergartners. And the gap is made up by families moving in. So in the end, we've been very stable, and the new property, the new homes have allowed the district to maintain really a pretty stable or slightly increasing enrollment. In the state aid formula, in the revenue limit formula, where school districts in Wisconsin are able to be successful from a financial perspective is through enrollment growth. There definitely are individuals who believe that the school finance system should be different than what it is today. But the current system for access to resources is really driven around enrollment, 3-year averages, enrollment increases. So the school district has always appreciated the long-term relationship with the village and our other municipal partners for planning for residential growth, because that planning for residential growth is essential for the success of the local school district.
So you talked about partnerships. So, I work in community economic development, and that's really community development, less emphasis on the economic. And when I'm sitting around the table with partners in other communities, we always try to have the school district and all of the municipalities in the school district, because the voters for that larger school district, when they're going to the ballot box, they're making decisions that really task the individual municipalities within that community with a job to do. So when we went to the ballot box and we passed the referendum a couple years ago, in order to fund the school district to meet that referendum, am I understanding that part of my goal as a leader in this community is to grow the tax base so that we have an increase in funds coming in that way, but also to keep an eye on how are we growing enrollment? Is that, the unofficial assignment? And nobody's ever called me up and said that, but I've kind of assumed that that is what I'm supposed to be like really working on to keep us healthy as kind of a larger school community.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I first arrived in Wanakee a little over 20 years ago, there was a commonly used term in the community that there was a discussion between the district and the village of a goal of around 125 new homes per year. So that resulted in manageable, reasonable growth that could support both the community at large and the school district. It certainly isn't a policy that any governmental body has, but it was always a discussion between the school district and the village about that planned continued growth over time. So from the school board's perspective, growth is important. Being able to manage that growth is very important so that the school district can plan facilities. And exactly, that's what you're referencing, that planned, to plan as a community is critical. And from the school's lens, to include the conversation about enrollment is what the school district appreciates about the relationship with all of our municipal partners.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate the information and your willingness to be here to answer questions. Do we have any other questions? Abby?
I have a question. When you're talking about, you can only tell us how money is going to come in this school year. How often does that change year to year?
Sure. So the question is regarding like the school finance system in the state. So the dollar amounts that go into the funding formula changes every state budget. Some of those factors include how much the state is investing in equalization aid. So that's one of them. But the actual system itself has really been in place since 1993. So in 1993, the state switched to a system called the revenue limit, and it was called 2/3 funding for equalization aid. That core system has fundamentally been in place since 1993. There have been many calls across the state for requests to change that system, but it is fundamentally looks a lot like it did back in 1993. Prior to that, it was very different, but the core of the system's been in place for quite a while.
All right. Thank you, Abby. Al?
So I have a question. I guess it pertains to a comment that was made earlier, and I guess I'm looking for reassurance. You mentioned 125 units a year back in the good old days of housing units. And more so when it came to multifamily, Wanakee was very restrictive when it came to multifamily. In that, I don't recall if it was no more than 10% or 20%, whatever percent it was, but it's very restrictive in not allowing multifamily. What I heard tonight, and with the multifamily explosion all over the place, what I heard tonight is that less than 10% of the rental units in the multifamily have children. Is that a function of what's being built? Or is it a function that parents with kids just don't live in multifamily?
Sure. So just a little background, the school district or the school board recently heard a report from an urban planning consultant that we worked with for quite a while. And one of the things that the firm did was study the apartment complexes in Wanakee, and especially the newer ones. A couple of things came out of it. Like Jack mentioned, the school board was given information that there is a very low number of students in general that comes out of apartment type housing. However, the numbers were higher in our community than other Dane County communities. So when our consultants looked at comparably in Dane County, they did find that we're seeing in Wanakee a little bit of a higher number of students coming out of apartments than they do in other parts of the county. But in general, when urban planners look at planning for public schools, there typically are not larger numbers of students coming out of the apartment complexes. If you mean like duplexes or lower cost housing, yes, lots of students do typically come out of that type of housing, but the apartment complexes themselves, it's not as common.
So I don't know how much you can refine the question, but I mean, I'll refine the question because I'm getting at a particular point. But a number of years ago, I was on a committee that helped with the multifamily here in Wanakee. And as part of that, there was a discussion about kids in the multifamily. And predominantly it's because the number of bedrooms that parents don't want, for the most part, to live in multifamily. I don't know if that's the demographics on that have changed. But for the most part, there were very little 3-bedroom apartments. 2-bedroom was probably the standard, if not 1. And now under today's work at home society, 2 bedrooms is the office as opposed to the bedroom. So I guess I'm refining the question from earlier. Was there any analysis or work done to understand that by the fact we're limiting it to 1 bedroom or 2 bedrooms, is that the limiting fact as to why more families aren't moving into multifamily?
Sure. So the report didn't look at the details about why families were choosing or not choosing to reside in some of the complexes. We were just looking at the actual information for students who were residing in those properties. And it's not a Wanakee only issue. It's definitely broader. It's Dane County. However, it was interesting to know that we are seeing in Wanakee a slightly higher number of students coming out of the apartments than we are seeing in other Dane County communities. But they didn't look at that deep of a level.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't think, do we have any more questions? Thank you very much for answering the questions about the TID and then the related questions that we also had.
All right, thank you.
I appreciate it so much for you being here tonight. Lauren, would you mind putting the map up that shows the improvement area in the green and the pink lines on Century Avenue and Woodland?
Yes. What is the TID?
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to take a second look at what the TID is and what's outside the TID that we're improving with the project. And while Lauren's pulling that up, I'll ask the same question that I asked earlier today, and that's to you, Todd Schmidt. So when we're looking at this green line here, that is outside of the TID area, correct? The woodland improvements. And then the Century, once you get past the intersection there, which we're improving the intersection for safety, all the way down Century Boulevard, that's also outside the TID. Correct. That's within that half-mile radius. I mean, part of that, not all of it. Part of it runs right through the TID. Yeah. When I'm looking at this, so if we are not using this TID to pay for those particular improvements, how are we funding it and what are the implications for the budget? Have we planned for that to happen? Is this the plan for that to happen? If we say no to this TID, what's our next step as a village board?
You know, I'm gonna ask Bill to help me a bit. Bill, if you want to jump up to the microphone too. The village management with the village board have done a really robust job of planning a couple key components related to that question. One is doing a 5-year capital plan, which rolls and is updated on an annual basis that allows us to plan for, think hard about the projects that really need to be done first, and then plan our borrowing to accomplish those in a way that gives us a relatively stable levy for debt over time. So there's no major blips in the tax rate. The other thing we do with the help of Ellers and Associates is we just started doing this a couple years ago, complete a 10-year projection and financial management plan that delves into both our capital projects and our operational spending needs and relates that to taxation and the ability of the board to maintain a relatively stable tax rate for property owners in Wanakee. Any adjustment to that requires sort of a rebalancing act that has to happen. And I know that Bill, for example, this year it's Prospect and
South Street.
South Street
And
and several others, and we
Right.
do just over $2 million of projects on an annual basis to keep up with what is existing road management, maintenance, replacement, reconstruction, or resurfacing. If a project is taken out that otherwise could be funded from any other source, let alone TIF, that has to be considered and readjusted, which would be a decision made by the village's Public Works Committee and Village Board. So I don't know, Bill, if you have, I mean, that's kind of the basics.
Yeah,
Then
I mean, we've already got a 5-year plan put together, so we'd have to shuffle things, which would push some streets probably out a little further than we care to, because we've got some streets that are in need of repair sooner than later. But to do that green area, let's say, like we talked earlier, that would actually, again, push some streets down where we've already pushed them once. I really would hate to go back to that neighborhood and say, hey, we need to push you another 2 years out to make it work.
Okay. And so if we're not using, TID is just taking tax dollars from this district and applying it to those projects. So the tax dollars, if we don't do this, where are the tax dollars coming from to pay for? If we said we're going to do those projects and we're going to add an extra, I think we said 1.2 million
Correct.
for this to the budget next year so that we can fix this road right away.
the entirety of the tax base.
The entirety of the tax base. So we could reasonably see that our taxes would go up to see this, but if we're doing the TID, we're not seeing that direct taxation? Or am I going out on a limb here?
There's potential for taxes to go up if we don't substitute other projects or
Okay.
delay other projects.
Okay, all right. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. I've asked,
I would only add the other challenge for us, especially when it comes to our pay-go approach to doing
Mhm.
projects, is that the village also has to exist under a levy limit condition. So unless we look to increase our borrowing expectations, or there's also options to referendum to exceed the levy limits, the village finds itself in a pinch point.
Okay.
So that also can present a challenge for us.
so debt or a referenda. Do we have other projects that we have on tap over the next couple of years that we're hoping to fund big projects?
Well, certainly, I mean, we can, again, we do a thoughtful job with the board to prepare that list every 5 years looking out, and we update it every year.
Okay,
And every year, one project punches another project in the nose. and
All right.
Something switches, so
all right,
that's,
all right. I've asked enough questions for now. Do you guys have questions? And Jeff, do you have questions?
I have a question for Todd, if that works, since you were just talking, Todd.
Jeff, did Jeff
So-
hear you?
I don't know.
That's still,
I see what he's with us.
On the process, Todd,
sorry.
I'll just wait.
All right, I'm listening.
No, I just want to make sure we're all good. Just to maybe walk through the process. So I understand we haven't reviewed a development agreement, and that's where a lot of the finer details would go into that. I'm assuming, is that correct? Or is that different in this case?
So you're talking about kind of like which comes first, the development or the TIF kind of thing? I know there's a question.
I think what I'm trying to get to is some of the points that were brought up today would be addressed in the development agreement, not what we're approving, moving forward with tonight, is just the actual going forward with the TIF.
I'll let Brian jump in. I think there's a good number of things that would.
Well, I mean, we've obviously heard a lot of comments, both pro and against the TIF. As is the case, anytime a municipality approves a TIF or an amendment to a TIF, that doesn't mean you have to spend the dollars. The terms and conditions, if this TIF is approved by the CDA, the village board, and the JRB, then when the projects would be done by the developer and how money would be shared with the developer would be part of that development
Okay,
agreement.
thank you. That's what I was looking for. And the point, or I guess, of asking that is that this is a pay-go, so it's a reimbursement. And so there would be criteria in there that,
Actually, one of the unique benefits of this TIF district is at least a portion of money that potentially would go to the developer under the agreement is already been created by the initial TIF district. So I know that there were some discussions at the JRB regarding potentially moving up some projects, particularly related to the school, and that's obviously part of the consideration if and when this district is approved. But there is, I think Todd had mentioned it hasn't been fully audited yet, it sounds like, but there's a belief that there may be $2.3 million already available to start assisting with some of these projects as part of the TIF district.
Awesome. But it would be reasonable to expect that reimbursements to the developer would not be made until XYZ has been completed.
That's all part of a development agreement, but I can tell you that that is how it was handled with the initial TIF district. In other words, public improvements were completed in stages and payments were made in
Okay,
stages.
thank you.
Other questions? Al?
So I have a question. Oops. I have a question. And this TID is being developed for a specific developer. Why aren't we developing or putting into the TID the property east of this TID district, to include all of it, so we don't have to come back a second time when the other side of the road's developed and do it all with one kick at the cat? And I've heard a number of times indicating that the so-called Hy-Vee property is under a TID, and it's not, from what I can see.
So there have been comments regarding, Hy-Vee and Festival, and that you are correct. In other words, initially when there were discussions with the developer regarding the property that Hy-Vee does own now, just so everyone knows, Hy-Vee owns that property, there was a request for a TIF. That would not have been part of TID 6. That would have been a new TID that potentially would have been created had the request, had the developer followed through on the request. As was noted by one of the speakers, it was at a meeting where the developer and Hy-Vee together said, you know what, we will be willing to go ahead here without the TIF. Now, I think one of the things that needs to be acknowledged is that property where Hy-Vee is located and the property to the south of Hy-Vee that has been developed receives some pretty significant benefits from this TIF and all the work that was already done on County Highway Q. And because had that work not been done on Q, then those developers would have been required to do some of that work. And the other thing I'll say is this goes back even further than TID 6. There was a unique circumstance in which the village executed an agreement with Mr. Tierney regarding construction of Peaceful Valley Parkway way back. And that when that road certainly has benefited not only TID 6, but also the land to the north of TID 6. So it is true that ultimately the developer to the north of TID 6 on the east side of Simon Questway withdrew their TIF request, but I also think it needs to be acknowledged that that land benefited from not only the construction of Peaceful Valley Parkway that the village participated in, but also the work that was done on Q as a result of this TIF district.
So I appreciate that feedback and the history, which I didn't understand all of it, obviously, but I still ask the question only because are we sure that Hy-Vee and or the other undeveloped land is not going to come back and have to ask for a TIF district, in which case we have to go through all this stuff again? Is there any downside including that right now?
Let you guys answer that one.
You're right out the door.
This is an expensive process.
Well, I guess the one thing that I would say is there is the potential that if you did have, let's say, Hy-Vee, which owns the land and came forward and requested a TIF, there is the possibility that they would want that to be a parcel specific TIF. And so that might be one reason for not doing it now. And the example I would give is, within the business park, we have, I believe, a parcel specific TIF, TID 7 for Renew Air. And so there are times where you do parcel specific TIFs. And so that's just one thing that I would throw out there.
I think the only other thing I'd note, Al, in terms of how this project plan has been proposed, there is language included that where the village could possibly enter into development agreements for specific projects to do project incentives. But what you have seen laid out is really an infrastructure only proposal in front of you. Again, that doesn't prohibit us from talking uniquely with certain specific projects. But we've honed in and paid great attention to the public improvements and have made that the highlight of this district. If you were to include Hy-Vee, to be clear, those public improvements are complete. There's not a single additional improvement necessary within public right of way or related to a public service. So that would change. I would say it sort of changes the scope, the parameter, some of I think what we like about this proposed district, and it changed that philosophy a little bit, I guess, because you'd be only talking then about straight up cash incentive, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Correct. Without trade for public improvement, so to speak.
Right.
And so
Todd, were you coming off?
Yeah.
No, okay.
No, clarification then to a comment that was made earlier during public hearing. This is an infrastructure TID agreement. So there isn't a theoretical organization that's coming in building a business right now that we're giving incentive to with this TID at this time. Correct.
Well, I mean, the project plan allows for
Yeah.
a development incentive to be provided. However, as far as I'm aware, the only discussions that have occurred to date are what Todd was talking about, which is effectively payments so that public improvements can be made. And I don't want to put Todd Taves on the spot, but he's got an excellent appendix to the project plan, which I think gets at a lot of the comments regarding but-for. And I think based on the Eller's analysis, that again, you don't have to approve this TID if you don't want to, but there's definitely support for the fact that the but-for test is satisfied in order for the commercial development to go in on the west side of Q.
Thank you. Todd, would you mind looking at that? And then earlier in the joint review board meeting, you said something about only a marginal advantage or incentive to the developer. I'm wondering if you could comment on that. And then I got a third question because I'm going to get three in all at once. After those two, we don't do TIDs or TIFs to extend for affordable housing, yet that is an option. So is there a ballpark it's the third item that you could give us if we extended past 2035, what we might be as a CDA able to recoup in terms of.
I'm going to answer that one first because it's easier and that way I won't forget it. Based on the cash flow projection, if the amendment area is fully developed at the values that are assumed, we would be generating 1.7 million plus of tax increment annually. So the housing extension, as it is permitted under current law, allows you at the point that you've recovered all district costs to hold the TID open for one more year with that final tax increment collection, then going into a special revenue fund for affordable housing. So based on the projection, the answer would be 1.7 million.
Okay. And again, it's not a reason to vote yes or no on this. It is not the reason we would do this. But when we talk about what does the village get out of projects like this, that could potentially be something that we would get out of it if a future board would decide that direction. So the other two questions then, and thank you.
Sure. And on the affordable housing, I would just mention sort of another benefit to that is it gives you a fairly significant resource that you can use to incentivize projects that often don't work well in TIFs, because affordable housing, especially the multifamily valued on the income approach, doesn't have a lot of property value. So it's a way to accomplish things that are either difficult to do with TIF and allows you to do it without a TIF, so that you can immediately realize some tax benefit. But as far as the first two questions, so included in the project plan, there's a brief memorandum attached as Appendix A. As part of the review of the village, asked that we receive certain information from the developer related to their costs, assumptions as to sale prices, absorption, and so forth. So one of my colleagues that works in our Twin Cities office, Shane Rudling, reviewed that information and provided you a summary. And in short, if the 2.8 million isn't provided, the project actually generates what we call a negative internal rate of return. So internal rate of return, appropriate metric for a for sale project, but essentially think of it as a return on investment. So in other words, you would lose money in a real sense without the TIF assistance. With the 2.8 million, it does bring the internal rate of return into a acceptable range, although it's on the very low end of that range. And in the memorandum, we talk about some things that could change that. Lots sell for a price higher than expected, infrastructure costs come in lower than expected, but it would take a pretty significant swing in both of those to the good to result in a return on investment that would sort of be at the top end or in excess of what we would consider to be appropriate for basically a land deal. And as was, I think, one of the comments that was mentioned, or relative to what's going to happen on the lots, that is not factoring in because the assistance is for making the lots development ready. So that's the lens at which we look at this. There's been no request for further assistance for any potential development on any of these sites that may follow.
Okay, thank you.
And I know, Todd, but for is a tricky concept that it's a tricky one. The taking it for those two words without the context of the state statutes and what it intends by but for, that can be a little tricky. Is there anything that you heard today in terms of comments, Todd, or the discussion that you think you can afford some more context to that might be helpful in general understanding of how the but for would be applied?
Well, ultimately, the but for is a finding that the Joint Review Board has to make, and the statute does not specifically indicate what that criteria is. So it's a subjective decision. Our point of view is that you need, to the extent possible, based on the type of project, provide as much substantiation for that, and that's why we do this type of review on a project where there is a return on investment. It's not possible to do on all projects. But this is the most as close to an empirical way that you can undertake to substantiate that there is a need for what is requested.
Great. Other questions? Jeff, did you have any questions?
No, actually, I had the same question Al asked, so he took the same question. No, I don't have any other question.
All right.
I would note that there was a question during the public hearing, during one of the comments about zoning within the TID district. The zoning has already been set through the plat approval process with the GDP and the SIP. And so for all intents and purposes, the zoning is set within that TID area as it is. To change that requires a fairly rigorous process that goes through Plan Commission, Joint Plan Commission in this case, and Village Board. So it's not something that you just kind of change on a whim. There's a lot of thought and deliberation that goes into that. So for what it's worth, the zoning is set in this area.
All right. Thank you very much. And then we did have one question during the public hearing. When do we say no to TID? We say no to TID regularly, I would say. Some don't make it to the point that the meeting we're having today. Some make it to an initial meeting with the board and the board isn't interested and we turn it down. So if you look back in the public record meetings, I won't go over the instances in which we've said no recently, but there are recent examples of us saying no. So yeah, we do say no. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the last page, which is known as Appendix A to the Ayler's exhibit. And you touched upon it already, and that is the internal rate of return, which I've worked with enough developers, I've done enough projections and forecasts, I've looked at enough IRRs, and I've done enough valuations. I know all that kind of stuff. And I agree that certainly a developer is entitled to have some type of internal rate of return on their project. None of that's been given to us, so I can't opine on any of that other than this one paragraph, which doesn't have any foundation but for the words on the page. And as a CPA, I tend not to trust just the words. I'll look for the source documents. So it's kind of hard for me to accept the words as is without seeing some of the underlying data, which includes the cost to develop and all those other things that supposedly were received, as well as there were some comments made about all the additional employees and all the additional income that's going to be generated. And I sit back and scratch my head as to where all that stuff came from. I don't know, because it's not here. But one of the comments made is in the recommendation, and that is that there can be a look back agreement that says, and I don't know what's a reasonable rate of return in your context for a developer, but a look back provision that says, you know what, we can look back, and if there is some extraordinary rate of return, then there's got to be kickback. Kickback's probably the wrong word. It's got a return of some of that $2.8 million back to the village or back to the TIF district. Number one. Number two, I would also think about audit provisions, because I know how numbers can work. And not that I would encourage, but I would certainly have the audit provisions in there that the village has the right to audit the records to verify that, yes, in fact, it is an extraordinary return, or in fact, it's a low return. You know, I agree there's some rate of return that's needed. I just don't know what those numbers are. And I guess I'm looking for some proviso that says that either one or both, one, that we have a look back, and number two, we have an audit possibility.
Is that
Okay.
something the village board would take up?
You're talking about development agreement terms. That wouldn't be in front of the CDA for discussion. So you've got a couple board members here sitting at the table listening in the audience. So
All right.
point taken.
All right. Last call for questions.
I'll make
Yeah.
a comment?
Yeah, please.
Okay. I think three things on this one, and this point's been made, and you know, Todd and staff have also kind of supported this, is that, you know, Don's done a lot in Wanakee. This isn't a new developer that's coming in and asking for this and all of that he's done, and he hasn't asked for this kind of help necessarily in the past. And so I believe if he was saying, I need this support with infrastructure to be able to provide the commercial uses that we want to see there, I believe that's real. And you know, it's a lot easier to build housing than it is to build commercial. That's just, everybody knows that. And I've been, you know, pretty vocal about wanting to support more commercial development, because it's hard, you know, we even to try to find a small, like, other spot to develop in town, there's not a lot available. So I would be ready to make a motion to support this. I think that it is good for the community. I think the use of TIF for this type of project and infrastructure is appropriate and a good use of the funds. So with that, I would move to adopt the resolution recommending to the village board that the project plan and boundaries of tax increment district number 6 be amended as shown on exhibits A and B.
I would second that motion.
All right. Any discussion on the motion? All right. Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Oh, he said thumb up. Oh, okay.
Yeah, amazing. All right, so motion carries. Thank you all for the discussion and the good questions today. Thank you for those that came out for the public hearing, both members of the public and both Steve and Jack from the school district. We really appreciate your time and energy today. With that, what else do we have on the agenda? One last.
We adjourn.
I'll second.
All right, any discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? All righty.